Hello demigods, monsters, and gods alike. Welcome back to the Olympus Report. Things are heating up in Percy's story. Let's see what happens in the third installment. Here's everything you need to know about Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the Titan's Curse. Before we jump into the Titan's Curse, let's recap some important things from the previous two books. Luke Castellan, a son of Hermes, resents the gods and is working on raising Kronos, the Titan Lord, from Tartarus to overthrow Olympus. Zeus is refusing to believe this. Luke tricked Percy, Annabeth, Tyson, and Grover to use the golden fleece on Thalia's pine tree. It brought Thalia, a daughter of Zeus, back to life. Now there are two demigods that the Great Prophecy could be talking about, Percy and Thalia. The Great Prophecy foretells a child of the Big Three destroying or saving Olympus come age 16. Okay, now on to the Titan's Curse. We start with Percy on a road trip up to Maine heading towards a boarding school. Sally Jackson, his mother, is driving him, Thalia, and Annabeth 8 hours to Westover Hall. Sally insists on waiting for them, but Percy tells her not to as he doesn't know how long they will be, and Annabeth assures him that they will keep Percy out of trouble. Once Sally leaves, Thalia comments on how cool of a mom Percy has. Percy asks Thalia if she's gotten in touch with her mother since coming back to life, and this makes Thalia pretty angry. But before a fight can break out, Annabeth interrupts them and they head inside of Westover Hall. The three are looking for Grover, who has been stationed at this school looking for demigods. They don't get very far before they are caught by a woman and a man with a French accent. The man and women are about to throw them out, but Thalia manipulates the mist to trick them into thinking they are students at the school. Then Grover shows up and is able to drag them away from Dr. Thorne, the guy with the French accent, who wasn't totally buying their excuses anyway. Afterwards, Percy wants to know how Thalia was able to trick them, and Thalia explains that Chiron taught her how to control the mist, and Thalia is shocked that Chiron hasn't taught Percy this yet. This gets Percy just a tad bit angry and jealous. Percy asks what the emergency is that called them all the way to Maine. And Grover explains that he's found two powerful demigods, a brother and a sister aged 10 and 12, but he doesn't know who their parents are. And then they have to move fast because Grover smells a monster. Grover says this to Thalia, and this again makes Percy jealous as Grover used to come to him for help. The school is currently having a school dance, so the four head off to the gym to search for the demigods. Grover reveals the two demigods, Nico and Bianca D'Angelo. Once there, Thalia says not to draw attention to Nico and Bianca. They need to wait for a good chance to get them and not make too much of a fuss, so Thalia tells everyone to just blend in. Percy and Annabeth then share an awkward but nice dance together. They catch up on what's been going on with each other throughout the year. Percy notices that Annabeth has grown taller and her hair's gotten just a tad bit longer, making her look older. Annabeth then reveals that things with her father have gotten better, but her father, Dr. Chase, just recently moved out to San Francisco and wants Annabeth to move out there with him. Not only is that super far and away from Camp Half-Blood, which is in Long Island, New York, but Annabeth also reveals that it's very dangerous for gods in San Francisco as there is a large number of monsters out there. As Annabeth is about to reveal more, they realize that Nico and Bianca have disappeared. They race off to find Thalia and Grover. Percy splits from Annabeth, however, as he decides he doesn't need Thalia's help and he can do this on his own. Percy catches a glimpse of Dr. Thorne, who has kidnapped the kids, and Percy races after him. Percy finds Nico and Bianca alone. He tries to comfort them as they're clearly terrified, but Percy realizes too late that they aren't afraid of him, but the monster behind Percy. Dr. Thorne is the monster that Grover sends, and Percy tries to dodge the attack but takes a poison needle to the shoulder. Dr. Thorne leads them outside, and Percy tries to use his empathy link to call Grover for help. Dr. Thorne takes them to a cliff and says they will wait here for their ride. Percy tries to comfort Nico and Bianca as they're clearly scared, and while he does this, Dr. Thorne pulls out a cell phone to call someone to say their package is ready to be delivered. Percy tries to come up with an escape plan, but Dr. Thorne says it's useless and that if he wanted him dead, he'd already be dead, but the employer wants them alive. Bianca says if he's trying to get ransom, it won't work as her and Nico have no family. Percy asks if he works for Luke, and Dr. Thorne laughs and reveals that his boss is someone known as the General. They then turn to see that a helicopter has arrived, and all seems hopeless until they're saved by an invisible Annabeth, with Grover and Thalia not far behind. Thalia uses her spear and a shield called Aegis, which has the face of Medusa on it and stuns opponents. Dr. Thorne then reveals his true form. He's the monster known as the Manticore. Human face, body of a lion, and tail that shoots poison missiles. Bianca is completely stunned by this, but Nico immediately recognizes the Manticore. They battle and things are not going well until they are saved by the Hunt. A barrage of arrows come to defend them, and Annabeth reveals that it's the Hunters of Artemis that have come to their rescue. The Hunters of Artemis are maidens that have sworn their devotion to the goddess Artemis and have promised eternal maidenhood just like the goddess herself. They're immortal, but they can die in battle. Dr. Thorne, backed into a corner, goes to kill Thalia, but Annabeth saves her by jumping onto the monster's neck and driving her dagger into his mane. The hunters then fire at the monster with the command of the First Lieutenant Zoe Nightshade. As Dr. Thorne goes off the cliff, he takes Annabeth with him. Percy tries to go after her, but they are still taking fire from the helicopter. Then a girl bathed in silver light shows up and destroys the helicopter. Zoe Nightshade and the girl bathed in silver light then approach our heroes. Percy insists that they go after Annabeth, but the girl in silver states that Annabeth is beyond their help now. Percy tries to argue, but is too shocked when the girl bathed in silver light reveals herself to be Artemis, the goddess of the moon and the hunt. It's also quickly revealed that there's some tension between Thalia and the First Lieutenant Zoe Nightshade. Artemis addresses Nico and Bianca and reveals that they are demigods. Bianca is very disbelieving, but Nico is thrilled, as he states it's just like his card game Mytho-Magic brought to life. A card game that revolves all around Greek mythology, and this is how Nico recognized the Manticore. Finally, Bianca comes to believe them, as it starts to make sense of everything that her and Nico have been through. Percy still wants to go look for Annabeth, but Artemis reveals that she has vanished by some type of magic. Grover then tells Nico and Bianca that they will take them to Camp Half-Blood, the only safe place for demigods. Nico is excited, but Bianca is hesitant. Artemis then reveals that there is another option. Bianca could join the hunters, but Thalia is strongly against this. Artemis then insists that it's been a long night and they should continue talking about this in the morning, and the hunters set up camp. But first, Artemis brings Bianca somewhere alone privately to talk. Thalia and Percy argue, as Thalia is angry with Percy that he went off on his own. If they had worked together, maybe Annabeth would still be there and the hunters wouldn't have had to get involved, who Thalia clearly does not like. They separate and Grover fixes Percy's wound from the poison. Percy and Nico talk for a bit, and Nico very excitedly asks a ton of questions. Zoe Nightshade then comes to get Percy, as Artemis wants to talk with him. Artemis then reveals why she appears so young. She could take on any form, but she prefers to be the age of most of her hunters, and her hunters are mostly young girls. Percy reveals to Artemis all that Dr. Thorne had said about the general and some sort of monster stirring. Artemis says she needs to go hunt this monster, as it has not appeared in millennia, and Zoe wants to go with her, but Artemis insists she needs to do this alone. Artemis plans to find this creature by the summer solstice and bring it to Olympus to convince the gods how much danger they truly are in. Artemis then tells Zoe to take the hunters back to Camp Half-Blood with the others, and Zoe refuses at first but finally relents. Artemis then brings in Bianca and asks her if she's made a decision. Percy asks what decision, and Bianca reveals that Artemis personally asked Bianca to join the hunt. Percy is shocked and tells Bianca that she can't leave Nico behind, but with Nico going to Camp Half-Blood, Bianca feels he'll be safe, so Bianca joins the hunt. The next morning, the hunters break down camp and Bianca explains her decision to Nico, who is pretty upset. Thalia is also pretty upset about this decision and says it's all Zoe's fault. They wait for sunrise, which brings the god Apollo, Artemis' twin, on his sun chariot. Apollo is the god of sun, music, medicine, poetry, prophecy, and archery. Apollo appears as a young, extremely good-looking man with shaggy blonde hair, and he's just a tad full of himself. Artemis asks Apollo to bring her hunters and the demigods to Camp Half-Blood for her. Apollo agrees enthusiastically. Apollo tasks Thalia with driving the sun chariot, and Thalia strongly tries to decline. Apollo asks if she's old enough, to which she replies, "I don't know." See, Thalia was 12 when she got turned into a pine tree, and she kept aging but slower than normal. With Apollo's godly wisdom, he determines that she is 15, about to be 16 in a week, and insists she drive. It goes horribly. Thalia torches some New England towns and crashes into the canoe lake in camp in a steamy entrance. This is the first time Percy has seen camp during the winter, and he's shocked how empty and snowy it is. The hunters head off to Cabin 8, and Apollo takes his leave after warning Percy about prophecies. Then Percy takes Nico to meet Chiron. Nico is sent off to watch the orientation film, and Percy, Grover, and Thalia catch Chiron up on everything that's happened. Chiron agrees that Annabeth may be alive and that they should search for her, but Mr. D does not agree, and him and Percy get into an argument. They are interrupted by a very excited Nico coming back into the room, before things can get too bad. Chiron tells Percy and Thalia to go tell the camp that they will have a capture the flag match tomorrow, as it is tradition when the hunters come to visit. Percy is still upset about Annabeth, but Thalia assures him that they'll get Annabeth back no matter what, as she couldn't stand to lose another friend after she found out that Luke is essentially lost. As a refresher, Luke, Thalia, and Annabeth were really good friends before they ever got to camp. Thalia also reveals to Percy that her mother died in a drunk driving accident. Percy expresses his condolences and apologizes for bringing it up before. Percy and Thalia then form a type of truce, and Percy feels a bit bad about being jealous of her. As Percy travels through camp, he notices that a usual year-rounder, Clarice, is missing. It's revealed that she's on a top-secret mission for Chiron. We then find out that Percy has Annabeth's Yankee cap of invisibility, and vows to give it back to her when he finds her. Percy settles into Cabin 3 and notices a new addition at the back, a fountain, a gift from his dad. It's filled with gold drachmas, and Percy uses it to contact his half-brother Tyson, who is currently working in Poseidon's forges. Percy asks Tyson if he's talked to their dad, Poseidon, much, and Tyson says he hasn't, as Poseidon's been super busy dealing with old sea spirits that have started to rebel. And they're actually protecting Luke's monster cruise ship, the Princess Andromeda, which holds the golden sarcophagus which holds Kronos' essence inside. Percy can't bring himself to tell Tyson about Annabeth and then disconnects the call. Percy is miserable at dinner that night and eventually turns in, only to have a nightmare. He sees Annabeth on a foggy hillside. Annabeth is there with Luke, but Luke is trapped. He's holding up what appears to be a darkness, and the darkness is crushing him. He begs Annabeth for help. Percy tries to warn her not to trust Luke, but Percy's voice won't work. Annabeth takes the darkness from Luke, and then Luke laughs and leaves her behind, being crushed, even though she's calling out for help, claiming that this is all part of his plan. Percy wakes up just past midnight, and he's sure of two things. One, Annabeth is in danger, and two, it's all Luke's fault. The next morning, Percy tells Grover about his dream, and Grover is really worried, especially after hearing about Zoe's dream. Percy questions how Grover knows about Zoe's dream, and Grover confesses that he was camped outside their cabin last night, so he heard her when she went to go tell Chiron about her dream. See, Grover's just a tad bit obsessed with Artemis and the hunters. Zoe tells Chiron that Artemis is in trouble and that she needs permission to leave right away. Chiron denies her request, as she's supposed to wait at camp until the hunters hear from Artemis. But Zoe argues that can't happen if Artemis is in trouble. Percy and Grover agree that his dream and Zoe's dream are probably connected. Percy decides to go talk to Zoe, but before he does, Grover reveals to Percy that he found a brochure in Annabeth's bag, a brochure for the Hunters of Artemis. The reason the hunters were so close to them at Westover Hall was Annabeth has been thinking about joining them. Percy is completely distracted and angry for the rest of the day by this news and completely forgets to talk to Zoe. Percy is completely fed up not being able to do anything, so he decides to go to the Oracle for a prophecy and some guidance, except it stays silent. By the time Capture the Flag rolls around, Percy has totally forgotten to talk to Zoe and is ready to beat the hunters at Capture the Flag. Zoe is still pretty upset about Artemis potentially being kidnapped and can't believe that Chiron is making her play this stupid game. Nico, however, is super excited, but Percy reminds him that this can be dangerous and to take it seriously. Before the game even starts, Percy and Thalia butt heads on the best strategy moving forward. Percy has been left on defense, but sees a chance to steal the hunter's flag, so he leaves his post, which ultimately leads to Zoe being able to steal their flag and the hunters winning the game of capture the flag. Thalia and Percy get into a huge argument and a brawl, and Chiron tries to stop it, but it seems nothing can get between Thalia and Percy, until they're distracted by the oracle floating across the ground towards them. For the first time ever, it's left the attic. It approaches Zoe, and she asks what she must do to save her goddess. The oracle then speaks. 5 shall go west to the goddess in chains. 1 shall be lost in the land without rain. The bane of Olympus shows the trail. Campers and hunters combined prevail. The Titan's curse must one withstand, and 1 shall perish by a parent's hand. Percy and then Grover are tasked with bringing the oracle back to the attic. Percy wishes he was able to look for Annabeth, and Grover also wishes he was out there looking for Pan, which has been on hold since last summer. Grover thinks that maybe the great stirring that Dr. Thorne talked about wasn't a monster, but maybe Pan, the lost god of the wild. Percy is then summoned to a meeting of the cabin leaders, and Percy and Thalia still refuse to talk to each other. Zoe is angsty to leave now that a quest has been issued, but Thalia and Chiron insist that it must be hunters and campers, according to the prophecy. Zoe is not happy about this and insists that the hunters don't need their help. Percy suggests 3 hunters and 2 campers, and Zoe finally relents since time is short. They need to find Artemis by the solstice and locate the monster she was hunting. On the hunter side, Zoe decides she will go along with Bianca and another hunter named Phoebe. When Zoe mentions Phoebe, Connor Stoll, head of the Hermes cabin, mentions that he has a t-shirt to give to Phoebe as she was admiring it. Zoe is confused by this but decides to give the t-shirt to Phoebe. From the camper side, Grover and Thalia volunteer, and Percy is angry as he needs to go on this quest to look for Annabeth. But Zoe refuses to travel with a boy and claims Grover doesn't count since he's a satyr. Chiron also mentions to Percy that maybe Zoe doesn't want Percy traveling with her because of the weapon he carries, Riptide. Percy is upset, and Chiron tries to comfort him and tells Percy that everything plays out for a reason and to go home for the holidays and be with his mother. Percy then calls his mother with an iris message and notices that there's a strange man in the apartment with her. So he waits till he heads to the bathroom. Then Percy gets his mom's attention and asks who that was. Sally says it's just a friend from her writing class, Mr. Blowfist, and that they better talk fast before he comes back. Percy catches his mom up on everything that happens, and Sally says that Percy needs to do what's inside his heart. As much as she would like him home, she knows that Percy's heart is telling him to do what's best for Annabeth, and Annabeth would do the same for Percy. Sally then disconnects the call. That night, Percy once again dreams of Annabeth, and she's still being crushed by the darkness. She is fading fast and is about to die. Luke and another person approach Annabeth. The person has a deep, rumbling voice, but Percy doesn't know who it is as he can't see. But he knows it's not Kronos. The deep voice and Luke have another person with them, a prisoner. It's Artemis, bound by the hands and feet. Artemis, unable to watch a maiden in pain, goes to help Annabeth. She takes the burden from Annabeth, but now Artemis is trapped, and the deep voice is revealed to be the mysterious general. He demands that Luke kill Annabeth, but Luke says she can still be useful as she can be used as bait to lure the others there. The general agrees, but only until the winter solstice, which is only a week away. Artemis says that the general's plan will never work, and they won't find the monster. The general laughs at her and says he's got work to do, namely making the hunter's quest as difficult as possible. Percy is then woken up by a loud banging on his door. He opens it to reveal a black Pegasus named Blackjack. Percy inadvertently rescued Blackjack from Luke's cruise ship last summer, so Blackjack is indebted to Percy and calls him boss, even though Percy thinks this is ridiculous and tells him not to, and that Blackjack doesn't owe Percy anything. And another thing, since Poseidon created horses, Percy can understand Pegasi. Blackjack has come to get Percy as the hippocampi, seahorses, relayed to Blackjack that there's a sea creature that needs Percy's help. Percy agrees, but on his way out the door, he grabs Annabeth's Yankee cap of invisibility because he has a feeling that he won't be returning to his cabin. Blackjack takes Percy down to the beach, and Percy jumps off and takes a plunge into the water. At the bottom, he sees 3 hippocampi swimming around a shipwreck. Under the boat is a trapped creature in a fishing net. When Percy gets closer, the creature moves, and Percy is shocked to see an actual cow with a serpent's tail. Percy takes out Riptide to cut the creature free, but the creature freaks out, so Percy puts his sword away. Percy nicknames the creature Bessie and talks to Bessie to try and keep it calm. With the help of the hippocampi, they're able to move the boat, and then Percy is able to untangle Bessie from the net, and Bessie is very appreciative. Percy then heads to shore and Blackjack picks him up. But on the way back to Percy's cabin, Percy sees Nico behind a column at the dining pavilion, so Percy has Blackjack set him down there. Percy realizes that Nico is eavesdropping on the hunters, so Percy decides to listen in as well using Annabeth's cap of invisibility. It turns out Phoebe, the third hunter that was supposed to go on a quest, broke out in hives due to the t-shirt given to her by the Stoll siblings, a prank. But instead of choosing someone else for the quest, Zoe insists that they don't have time and must just leave with the 4 they already have. Percy then confronts Nico, who was planning on following his sister on the quest, but Percy convinces him not to go as it would be too dangerous, but Nico convinces Percy to go instead, to follow them and stay invisible. And he makes Percy promise to keep Bianca safe. So with that, Percy hops back on Blackjack and he takes off after everyone on the quest. Percy and Blackjack follow the camp van to New York, where they take a break, but before they can take off again after the van, Percy is caught by Dionysus, or better known as Mr. D. After some deep conversation, Mr. D ultimately lets Percy go in hopes that he'll die on the quest, as according to the prophecy, 2 of them are going to die, as Mr. D really just does not like heroes, as most of them turn out to be selfish and full of themselves. And with that, Percy and Blackjack take off once again for the van. They take a pit stop in Maryland, and Percy decides to give Blackjack a break as he's pretty winded. Percy then heads into a convenience store with the cap of invisibility, but soon Grover, Zoe, Bianca, and Thalia also head into that convenience store. Percy overhears Grover telling the others that he used a tracking spell, and the spell told him that they need to go to Washington, D.C. Zoe is confused by this as the prophecy said to go west, but she finally relents. Bianca also reveals that she and Nico used to live in Washington, D.C., but for some reason she had forgotten until right now. So with that, all of them head off to Washington, D.C. They continue south and stop at a museum in Washington. Percy sends an exhausted Blackjack back to camp, insisting that he'll be fine without him. The heroes on the quest head into the museum, and Percy realizes that they're being followed by none other than Dr. Thorne. Percy, with the cap of invisibility, follows Dr. Thorne, who separates from Percy's friends and goes into a private section of the museum. There are monsters and Luke, who Percy points out looks absolutely horrible. But it's not just Luke, there is a man there in a white suit, the mysterious general. Dr. Thorne reports that the heroes have arrived from the quest. The general wants to know who, and Dr. Thorne reports that it's Bianca, Zoe, Thalia, and Grover. Then the general takes particular interest in Zoe, claiming that he knows this one. Luke says that he can take him, but the general says to be patient and that he has a surprise for our heroes that will keep them occupied. The general wants to isolate Thalia so his monsters can capture her, and he has a plan to get rid of the others. He then pulls out some teeth and plants them in the ground. And then all of a sudden, out of the ground grow cuddly skeleton kittens. A guard messed up and took teeth from the saber-tooth exhibit instead of the T-Rex exhibit. The guard then rushes off to get the right teeth. But the new teeth don't produce dinosaurs. They produce an undead skeleton army. The general gives them one of the hunter's scarves so the skeletons can have their scent. But Percy grabs the scarf before they can sniff it. But the skeletons grabbed a piece of Percy's shirt, and now the skeletons have Percy's scent. Percy then runs. Percy then runs into his friends quite literally, and Zoe is not happy to see him. Percy warns them about everything he just saw, and Zoe accuses him of being a liar as the general couldn't possibly be there in Washington, D.C. However, they all agree it would be best to get out of there. Zoe doesn't want Percy to come, but finally just lets him tag along. Then they're attacked by the Nemean lion. Things are going badly as usual, as the lion has an impenetrable hide. Percy wants Zoe to shoot the lion in the mouth as that's its only weak point, but they can't get a good shot. So with Percy's quick thinking, he runs to the gift shop and grabs some space food as they're in an air and space museum and chucks it in the lion's mouth. The lion gags and Zoe gets the shot in, and the lion explodes into dust and leaves behind a coat, a spoil of war. Percy takes the lion's coat and they all leave together. And now Zoe has finally accepted Percy as a fifth member of the quest. Fighting together for your lives will ultimately develop a bond. They hop in the van but quickly realize the van is once again being followed, so they ditch it in a mall parking lot and take a subway. Bianca mentions how when her and Nico lived in DC, these subway tracks were being built. Percy is super confused by this as the subway looks really old, way older than 12 years. But before they can question Bianca further, they have to switch trains. They end up at the end of the line in a railway yard and are starting to freeze to death. They spot a homeless man in a train car and he invites them in and says the train is heading west, where they need to go. So they hop in. In the train, Thalia and Percy talk, and Thalia reveals that they're headed to San Francisco as that's where Artemis was headed. Percy remembers what Annabeth said about San Francisco being dangerous for demigods and asks why. Thalia reveals that the mist is really thick there thanks to the Mountain of Despair. Thalia also reveals why she doesn't like the Hunters. When she was traveling with Luke and Annabeth, the Hunters tried to recruit her, but she couldn't leave Luke behind, and that caused a big fight between her and Zoe. Zoe saying that Luke will ultimately betray her anyway, this being the reason they don't like each other. Percy then ends up talking to the homeless guy, and it's actually revealed that the homeless guy is the god Apollo, helping them out on their quest. But he tells Percy to just call him Fred for right now. An odd choice if you ask me. He looks more like a Lester. Percy then realizes that the train is traveling at super fast speed. Apollo can't take them all the way to San Francisco, but he is taking them a good part of the way. Apollo tells Percy that if they haven't found the monster that Artemis was seeking by the time they get to San Francisco, to seek out Nereus, the old man of the sea, as he has infinite knowledge. Apollo then puts Percy to sleep and he has an extremely strange dream. He's in somebody else's body and he's running with a girl. The girl reveals that she's trying to help this hero break into her father's garden and defeat a monster. In order to defeat the monster, she gifts this hero with a sword called Anaclymos. Then Percy wakes up and he's pretty sure of two things. The sword, Anaclymos, is his sword, Riptide, and the girl was none other than Zoe Nightshade. The train has stopped and they end up in a small ski town. The group splits up in hopes of finding transportation. Percy and Bianca have a heart-to-heart, and Percy assures Bianca that as long as she's happy, she made the right decision to join the Hunters. Bianca tells Percy that she only felt comfortable leaving Nico behind because she had met Percy and knew he would be in good hands at Camp Half-Blood. Bianca also reveals a little more about her and Nico's past. They went to school in Washington, D.C. for a while before they were sent to live in a hotel for a couple of months and eventually ended up at Westover Hall. The rest then come back with coffee and pastries, and something really weird happens. A warm breeze in the middle of winter blows past them, and the birds on Grover's coffee cup come alive and fly away. Then Grover passes out. After Grover passes out, they realize they've been found by the skeleton warriors. They gather Grover and try to run. The skeletons of course catch up, and Grover keeps mumbling something about a gift of the wild. But before they can figure out what he means, the skeletons catch up to them and the battle is not going well. Until Bianca is able to cause one of the skeletons to evaporate into dust with a stab of her sword. Everyone is confused on how she was able to do this, but Bianca doesn't understand either and can't seem to do it again. Then Grover wakes up right as a giant boar charges them and the skeleton warriors. Grover tells them not to kill it as it's a gift from the wild, but the boar is definitely trying to kill them. Thalia and Percy are able to lure the boar away, but end up at a bridge. Percy tries to get Thalia to cross, but she refuses. Percy then tackles Thalia over the edge, and they slide down on Thalia's shield like a sled. The boar ends up wedged and trapped, and Percy and Thalia come away okay with some minor scrapes and bruises. Percy then realizes that Thalia is afraid of heights, why she had such issues on the Sun Chariot, and why she refused to cross the bridge. Thalia is embarrassed, but Percy promises not to tell anyone. Grover then shows up and claims that the boar showed up right as the wind showed up, and the wind felt like the presence of Pan, and that's how he knew the boar was a gift from the wild. Grover then tames the boar and they ride it west. The boar takes them as far as Arizona. They find a junkyard and decide to camp there for the night. They talk while looking up at the stars, and now Grover is convinced that Pan is linked to coffee, as he was drinking coffee when the gift from the wild showed up. They also try and figure out how Bianca was able to defeat the skeleton warrior, but can't seem to figure out how. But they do figure out something else. When the group mentions going to Las Vegas, Bianca freaks out as she mentions that her and Nico stayed there for a while, but she can't remember much as it's pretty fuzzy. That's when Percy puts 2 and 2 together. He asks Bianca if the hotel her and Nico stayed at was called the Lotus Hotel and Casino. Bianca is confused how Percy could have possibly known this, but confirms it. Percy explains how he, Grover, and Annabeth took a stop in the hotel for about 5 minutes and came out 5 days later. So if Bianca and Nico went in for a couple of months, they came out approximately 70 years later. Before Bianca can process this, a car pulls up to their campsite. Ares, the god of war, Percy's least favorite god, pops his head out and claims he has someone inside that wants to have a chat with Percy. The others argue, but eventually Percy agrees to get in the car. When he gets in, he's speechless, as the most gorgeous woman he's ever seen is in front of him, Aphrodite, the goddess of love. He says that her face changes shape multiple times, and for a split second, he sees Annabeth's face in there. Aphrodite tells Percy to abandon the quest and only go and rescue Annabeth for love. Percy denies loving Annabeth, but he doesn't deny that that is the most important thing to him. Aphrodite also warns Percy to be careful as he's currently in her husband's domain, Hephaestus, and he doesn't like his stuff being taken. And with that, Percy is kicked out of the car and the gods take their leave. They continue west through the junkyard, which is filled with gold, but thanks to Aphrodite's warning, they don't take anything. They spot a highway, but the quickest path there is to climb over what looks like a giant foot. They make it across, but once they do, they look back and realize the mass was a foot, and it's coming alive. A giant automaton made by Hephaestus starts attacking them. Percy soon realizes that Bianca took something. He tells her to give it back. Bianca reveals what she stole was a Myth-O-Magic statue for Nico, the last one he didn't have. She puts it back, but it's too late. The automaton keeps attacking. Percy has the idea to climb inside the robot to try and shut it down, but Bianca goes instead, as she says this is all her fault. But before she goes, she makes Percy promise to give the Myth-O-Magic statue to Nico in case she doesn't come back. Bianca is successful and saves everyone, but when the automaton collapses in on itself, she is crushed. And the first prophecy claims its victim. One shall be lost in the land without rain. Everyone is shocked and completely heartbroken, but Thalia reminds them that the skeleton warriors are still out there, so they need to keep moving. Percy keeps looking down at the figurine in his hands and thinking about Nico. What could he say to make this better? He promised Nico that he would keep Bianca safe. They eventually find a tow truck and continue traveling west, but eventually the tow truck runs out of gas. They then continue on foot upstream until they find some canoes and hop in, and continue traveling upstream being pushed by naiads. Percy and Zoe end up in the same canoe. Percy tries to make Zoe feel better and tells her that Bianca wasn't her fault, and neither was Artemis being captured. We then learn a bit more about Zoe's past. She fell for a hero and gave him Percy's sword to betray her father and steal from his garden. Because of this, she was exiled. This is the dream that Percy had. But before she can reveal more, they come upon the Hoover Dam. They all wish Annabeth was there to see the dam, as they all agree that she would have freaked out. This makes them all miss her just a little bit more. So Zoe decides to take a pit stop and go visit the dam, as the road is up there anyway. Once inside, they come across guardian angel statues, monuments dedicated to Zeus. Thalia confesses that she once came here before seeking help and guidance from her father, but he never answered her. Zoe then claims that they should find the damn snack bar, which spawns one of the funniest ongoing jokes in Percy Jackson. Percy, Thalia, and Grover continue to laugh as they say things like damn French fries and the damn bathroom. And Zoe is just completely confused, which makes it even funnier. But before they continue on with their fun, they're interrupted by a moo. Percy goes to check it out and realizes that down below in the dam is his old friend from Long Island, Bessie. Bessie wants Percy to follow him, but Percy can't leave his friends behind. And before he can figure out what to do, Bessie disappears. And the skeleton warriors show up. Percy takes off looking for his friends, and on the way he once again runs into a disguised Apollo in an elevator. When Percy rushes out of the elevator, he swings his sword at what he thinks is a skeleton, but is actually a mortal girl with frizzy red hair. The mortal is unharmed, as celestial bronze can't harm mortals. But the weird part is the mortal can see Percy's sword. In other words, she can see through the mist. She introduces herself as Rachel Elizabeth Dare and gives Percy a hard time, but once she sees the skeleton warriors and realizes he's in trouble, she decides to help Percy out. Percy hides in the bathroom and she directs the skeleton warriors the other way. Percy thanks her and gives her his name before he bolts away, leaving behind a very confused Rachel. Percy then catches up with his friends and warns them that they need to leave now. Our heroes seem trapped until Percy comes up with the idea to hop on the guardian angel statues and ask Thalia to ask her father for help. She doesn't believe anything will happen, but when she prays to Zeus, the guardian angel statues, actually automatons, come alive and carry them away. The statues fly them the rest of the way to San Francisco, and Thalia is terrified the whole time, so Percy tries to distract her by telling her about the weird mortal he ran into, Rachel Elizabeth Dare. Then they land in San Francisco, and once there they decide to find Nereus, the old man of the sea, who Apollo told them to find, in hopes of finding out what this mysterious monster is that everyone keeps talking about. Zoe leads them to the shore and dresses Percy up like a homeless man and says it will help him blend in. Zoe tells Percy that in order to find Nereus, that Percy needs to follow the smell. And also, once you have him, do not let go, as he's going to try and escape. Percy travels along the shore and smells normal homeless guys, but nothing too weird, until he spots a homeless guy in a pink bathrobe that smells like the rotting sea. He decides that this must be Nereus. Percy struggles to hold on once he grabs him, but tricks Nereus into going into the water, where Percy will have a better shot being a sudden Poseidon. Percy succeeds, but they only get one question answered. Percy asks where they can find the monster, and Nereus responds right here, and then he turns into a goldfish and disappears. Percy screams that he tricked them, but before he can take off after Nereus, they are interrupted by a moo. Bessie has shown up, and with Grover there, we finally know what he's trying to say. Grover translates. Bessie is actually an Orpheotaurus, and says that Percy is his protector, and Bessie is being chased by bad people. Zoe finally understands that this monster is the monster they've been looking for. The Orpheotaurus isn't dangerous, but if someone was cruel enough to sacrifice the beast, then they would be gifted the power to destroy Olympus. They decide that they need to protect Bessie at all costs, because if Luke gets his hands on Bessie, he would sacrifice Bessie in a heartbeat. But before they can figure out how to protect the sea cow, they're interrupted by Dr. Thorne. But instead of fighting our heroes, Dr. Thorne is there to get inside Thalia's head. He tells her her destiny is to sacrifice the Orpheotaurus and gain the power to overthrow Olympus when she turns 16 in 2 days, which is why Lord Kronos brought her back. Thalia is fighting with the decision and is in some sort of a trance, but Percy argues with her, and then Grover plays a tune on his reed pipes to get the docks to attack Dr. Thorne and his lackeys. Our heroes then try to escape, and Zoe tells Percy to escape in the sea with Bessie, but Percy refuses to leave his friends behind. With Dr. Thorne chasing them, they decide to call Camp Half-Blood for help in hopes of seeking Chiron's advice. But Chiron isn't there when they call. Instead, it's Mr. D, and Mr. D absolutely refuses to help them, until Percy gives up his pride and asks politely, "Mr. D, could you please help us?" Surprising everyone, Mr. D actually helps them. He traps Dr. Thorne and his lackeys in growing grapevines, finally destroying Dr. Thorne. Mr. D then tells Percy that Zoe will know where to go from here, and he takes his leave. Zoe reveals that they must head to the garden of her sisters. She needs to head home, where she was exiled from, as the entrance to the Mountain of Despair is located there. And they need to make it by sundown, or otherwise they need to wait till tomorrow. In other words, the day after the solstice. But first they need to get Bessie to safety. Percy realizes that Bessie can just appear in bodies of water, so Grover volunteers to lead Bessie back to Long Island, where Chiron can keep him safe. Percy then prays to his dad that Bessie and Grover are safe in the sea on their travels. Percy also wants to give Grover the lion's pelt to keep him safe, as it kept Hercules safe. Percy then realizes that the hero that got Zoe exiled from her family was the great Hercules, a guy he had always looked up to but actually turned out to be not so great. Percy then decides that he's going to be a better person than Hercules and throws the lion's pelt into the ocean to get rid of it instead. Now they just need a car to travel to the Mountain of Despair. Percy remembers that Annabeth had said that her father moved out to San Francisco, so they go to the Chase family home in hopes that they'll let them borrow a car. Once they get there, Dr. Chase lets them in, as they're friends of Annabeth. But he's very distracted and very interested in Zoe, as she's been witness to history being thousands of years old. And well, he's a history professor. But when Percy mentions that Annabeth is in danger, Dr. Chase becomes very serious. Percy asks to borrow a car, but Dr. Chase insists on taking them himself, as what kind of father would he be if he didn't go rescue his daughter? But Percy mentions that mortals can't go where they're going, so Dr. Chase relents and lets them borrow the car. Before they leave, Annabeth's stepmom tells Percy to tell Annabeth that Annabeth will always have a home here. They make it to the Mountain of Despair, the location of Zoe's father's garden, but when they get there, they realize they have company. Luke's monster cruise ship, the Princess Andromeda, is docked. Their car is then blasted by a lightning bolt, and Thalia thinks it's her father trying to kill her, but Percy argues that it was probably just Kronos playing with her emotions again. Zoe shushes them and says they're going to wake the dragon, Landon. They've made it to the garden. They're greeted by Zoe's sisters, who still harbor a lot of hatred of Zoe for betraying their father. Zoe's sisters let them pass as they believe they will never get past Landon, the dragon. Zoe decides to distract Landon while the others sneak around to the side to the entrance to the Mountain of Despair. All seems to be going smoothly at first, but Landon suddenly lunges at Zoe. They all make it past, but Zoe has been hurt by the dragon. Once inside the entrance, they realize Mount Orthus, the home of the Titans, like how Olympus houses the gods, has started to resurrect here. Zoe then reveals that this is the mountain where a Titan holds up the sky. They then find Artemis, and the dark force pressing down on her is actually the sky. Zoe goes to help Artemis, but Artemis says to stay back as it's a trap. They are then confronted by the general and Luke, with Annabeth as captive. And the general is revealed to be none other than the Titan Atlas, who also happens to be Zoe's father. Percy notices that Annabeth's blonde hair now has a streak of gray from her time holding up the sky. Artemis forbids Zoe from taking the sky from the goddess. Atlas laughs at this and says when Kronos rules, he'll have all the Olympians taking turns holding up the sky. Percy challenges Atlas, but Atlas says he doesn't fight mortals and will have Luke fight his battles. Percy can't help but notice how tired and awful Luke looks. Luke begs Thalia to join him and points to a pond of water and says if you call the Orpheal Taurus, he will appear there. Percy must then try and block thoughts of Bessie, because if he thinks too hard about Bessie, Bessie will show up. Luke claims that Thalia joining him is for the best. If she doesn't join forces with Kronos, Kronos will be forced to use another more horrible method. Luke then calls his army, which he says will soon be ready to attack Camp Half-Blood. But Thalia doesn't go to Luke's side. Instead, she fights him and the rest of the army with our heroes. Percy tries to fight Atlas, but is quickly outmatched. Percy also notices that his sword failed to listen to him. This is from the curse that Ares placed on him in the first book. When you need your sword the most, it shall fail you. Percy realizes that he can't handle Atlas on his own, and realizes another part of the prophecy. The Titan's curse one must withstand. So Percy takes the burden of the sky from Artemis, freeing the goddess. Artemis then fights Atlas as Thalia fights Luke, and all seems to be going fairly well until Atlas gets the upper hand on Artemis. Artemis is about to be struck, but Zoe jumps in front of her father's lance and shoots an arrow in his head, but it only dazes him, and Atlas sends Zoe flying into a pile of rocks. Artemis then, using this distraction, uses Atlas's javelin like a lever when he attacks and flings him overhead right at Percy. Percy understands what's about to happen, and when Atlas crashes into him, Percy lets go of the sky, trapping Atlas once again where he belongs. Percy now also notices that he has a gray streak in his hair to match Annabeth's. Thalia also has Luke cornered with his back against the edge of a cliff. Annabeth, just freeing herself from her bonds, pleads with Thalia not to kill Luke. However, with this distraction, Luke tries to grab for Thalia's spear, and in reflex she kicks him, sending him over the edge of the cliff and plummeting below. In anger for their leader, Luke's monster army attacks in full force, and all seems hopeless until a plane zooms in from the sky, and in it is Dr. Chase, shooting celestial bronze bullets. Using this distraction, Artemis calls her chariot and they pile in, including a very injured Zoe, and they fly off with Dr. Chase following them. When they land, Annabeth gives her father a big hug and says how cool that was, but unfortunately their happy reunion is cut short when they realize how badly Zoe has been injured. The cut she received from Landon the dragon on the way up the mountain was poisonous. Artemis tries to heal her, but the damage done by Atlas on top of the poison is just too much. The final line of the prophecy is coming true. One will die by a parent's hand. Thalia and Zoe apologize for always being at each other's throat, and Thalia claims that Zoe was right about all men. They're horrible. Zoe was right about Luke the whole time. But Zoe looks at Percy and claims maybe she wasn't fully right. Not all men are completely horrible. To honor her lieutenant, Artemis makes Zoe into a constellation so she can forever be in the stars. Artemis then takes her leave as she needs to get to Mount Olympus right away. It's time for the winter solstice. Just then, Blackjack and two other Pegasi swoop down to carry our heroes, minus Dr. Chase, to Mount Olympus. Annabeth and her dad say goodbye, and Dr. Chase insists to Annabeth that she will always have a home in San Francisco. Annabeth thanks him, and then our three heroes set off for Mount Olympus. On the way back, Thalia falls asleep, completely exhausted, which is for the best because she'd be terrified the whole time. Percy and Annabeth then have a chance to catch up, and Annabeth thanks Percy for rescuing her and never giving up on her. Percy tells her that he never doubted for a second that she was out there alive. Annabeth then tells Percy that Luke survived the fall. Percy asks how could this be, but Annabeth says she just knows, like how Percy just knew that she was alive. And Percy isn't too happy with this comparison. They then arrive at New York, and Thalia wakes up, claiming that it started, the meeting of the gods at the winter solstice. They fly straight up to Olympus, and the doors open for our heroes. Artemis welcomes them, and Percy notices that there's other guests, Grover and Bessie. Artemis thanks our heroes for all they've done, and the council has finally voted to do something about Kronos. Artemis and Apollo will hunt the strongest monsters before they can join Luke. Poseidon has permission to sink the Princess Andromeda, and Athena is going to check that no more Titans have escaped their prison. However, the gods, especially Athena, want to take it one step further and want to kill Thalia and Percy as they pose too much of a risk to Olympus with the great prophecy looming over their heads. Artemis shuts this idea down immediately and says they should be rewarded for their help, and that's just what she intends to do. Zeus agrees, but then decides the Ophriotaurus should be destroyed instead. Percy argues to save Bessie and claims that they can't control prophecy. It never works. And if they kill Bessie, they're no better than the Titans. Annabeth pleads with the gods that they just need to trust Thalia and Percy, that they won't do anything to destroy Olympus. But before they can finally decide, Artemis brings up the issue of the fact that she now needs a new lieutenant. Artemis and Zeus then go off privately to speak alone. Percy then thinks that Artemis is going to ask Annabeth, and he tries to plead with Annabeth not to join the hunters, but he can't seem to get the words out. It kind of more just looks like he's ready to throw up. But when Artemis comes back, it's not Annabeth she asks. She asks Thalia. Thalia agrees, as she will now never turn 16, and the prophecy can't be about her. She will never be tempted again. Instead, she will serve Lady Artemis. Thalia then says goodbye to her friends and thanks them before she has to go leave on the hunt. And with this new leverage, Percy gets the gods not to kill Bessie, as he won't be 16 for 2 more years, and Poseidon can hide Bessie where no one will find him. They decide to create an aquarium here at Mount Olympus that will house Bessie. And now, since no one's dying or being murdered, Zeus declares that they need a celebration. They throw a party for our heroes, Mount Olympus style. Percy gets to catch up with his dad, where Poseidon confirms that Luke is indeed still alive. Percy then also has a chat with Athena, Annabeth's mom, and Athena tells Percy that his fatal flaw is personal loyalty. He puts his loves and friends above anything else, sometimes even the mission or the good of the world. Athena thinks Percy is better off dead, but hopes he proves her wrong. She also doesn't approve of Percy's friendship with her daughter, Annabeth. Annabeth then interrupts them and Athena takes her leave. Annabeth then asks Percy what he wanted to tell her before, but instead of telling her, Percy just asks her to dance, as their dance at Westover Hall got interrupted. Annabeth is a bit shocked, but agrees. Before Percy leaves Olympus, he makes a few calls. First to Tyson, where he finds out Tyson will be coming back to camp for the summer. And one to his mom, where she is once again with the man, Mr. Blowfist. Sally tries to explain, but Percy interrupts her and says, "As long as you're happy, Mom, it's good with me." Then they head back to camp, where they're greeted by Chiron. Clarice is also back from her top secret mission, and Percy gets the sense that it didn't go too well, as Clarice doesn't try and pulverize Percy on sight. They talk about all that has happened and will happen, and Percy lets everyone know that Luke is indeed still alive. But before they can talk more, Nico runs into the room and demands to see his sister. Percy pulls Nico aside and delivers the news, and also gives Nico the figurine that Bianca wanted him to have. But Nico does not take the news well, screaming at Percy that he's a liar to break his promise. Percy pleads with Nico to understand, and that maybe Bianca may still be alive, as they never found a body. But Nico says that she's definitely dead. He can sense it. He just knows. And before Percy can question this about how Nico just knows his sister is dead, they're interrupted by the skeleton warriors. Nico accuses Percy of trying to kill him, and Percy of course denies this and tells Nico to run, to go get help. But Nico refuses and screams to go away, and with that, a giant chasm opens up and envelops the skeletons. Nico then runs off screaming that he hates Percy. Percy tries to go after him, but he slips on something. When he looks down, it's the figurine from Mythomagic, and he finally realizes what god it's of. Hades, Lord of the Dead. Percy then puts everything together. Nico is a son of Hades, and more important, a child of the Big Three. There's now another half-blood that the Great Prophecy could be about. Percy, Annabeth, and Grover look for Nico, but they can't find him anywhere. Annabeth wants to tell Chiron, but Percy refuses, saying that they need to keep Nico's parentage a secret for as long as they can, at least until Percy turns 16, so the prophecy can be about Percy. Annabeth questions if Hades also broke the oath not to have kids, but Percy doesn't think so, as Nico and Bianca were out of commission for a long time in the Lotus Hotel and Casino. But what's not clear is who took Nico and Bianca out of the hotel, and why did they reappear now all of a sudden? But Percy knows one thing. He swears to protect Nico and find him before Luke can. Percy leaves out a bunch of information when he tells Chiron about Nico's disappearance. Chiron is a little skeptical, but ultimately buys it. Percy and Chiron talk about the inevitable battle that Luke will unleash upon Camp Half-Blood, but Chiron says it won't be until next summer, so they have time to prepare. Annabeth decides to go to San Francisco to live with her father, as this way she can keep an eye on Mount Orthus. But before they can talk more about planning, they're interrupted by Grover, who runs in. He claims he was drinking coffee and he was once more contacted by Pan. And Pan said to him, "I await you." Now Grover is super ready to get back to his quest to look for Pan, the lost god of the wild. And that, Half-Bloods, is where the third installment of Percy's story ends. Well, at least until the Battle of the Labyrinth, which will be coming up next. But in the meantime, let me know what your favorite part of the Titan's Curse was down below. And until next time, I'll be signing off. And please, Half-Bloods, always remember to stay safe.